Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Wednesday, July 31st. What is up, everybody? One of these days, we're going to just stop breaking the cycle of just starting off the pod with a bunch of excuses and explaining as to why it's so late. So bear with me with that. Hopefully that changes on the next episode. Probably won't be for another couple episodes. But that being said, we're basically on like a 2-week cycle now. I do apologize for that. It is the off season. I'm sure you guys will survive without your Words with Wallace content as consistently as I'm able to provide it during the season. Had a lot going on. Had a work event, then caught COVID, then turned 27. The latter two really sucked. So it's been busy. There's been a lot going on. But that being said, we're excited. We're headed home tomorrow. Wanted to crank out this podcast on everything that we've missed, right? We are now a full month into NBA free agency. Basically, all of the loose ends are tied up at this point, and that's going to be the meat and potatoes of this podcast, just kind of talking about the last remaining signings of free agency, at least the notable ones, just for some of the contending teams that we'll talk about. And then, of course, we've had the Olympics going on. Team USA, been watching them pretty closely. Was hoping to mainly talk about Team USA, to be honest with you. And, despite their first two real Olympic games not being all that close, we're going to be able to milk some content out of this one. We had some drama with Team USA that you guys probably have already seen at the time of recording this podcast. But regardless, excited to talk about what's up with Team USA basketball and their undefeated stretch through the exhibition games. They are 2-0 in the actual group stage of the Olympics. So all things are good on that front, but we do have some storylines to talk about with Team USA at the end of this episode. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Should be a relatively quick podcast episode today. We have some free agency news, and I think the headliner of all the news that I missed since my last podcast, in which we did cover the winners and losers of free agency, cover all of the biggest moves of the offseason, can be found on that last podcast, but this is just kind of tying up the loose ends. But that being said, the headliner was definitely Russell Westbrook, changing teams yet again, and now he has joined the Denver Nuggets. Let's talk about how it happened. Start off with a sign-in trade with the Utah Jazz that sent Russell Westbrook to the Jazz, and in return, the Clippers received Chris Dunn. I believe this is the second time that Russell Westbrook has been traded to the Jazz and then bought out and then immediately signed with another team. He actually did that a couple years ago. I think when he left the Lakers, he was sent over to the Jazz, bought out, he signed with the Clippers. This time, again, traded over to the Jazz for Chris Dunn. Now he has been bought out by the Jazz, and he has signed a 2-year, $7 million contract with the Denver Nuggets. So I think this is a really interesting move on a lot of fronts, right? First of all, the Nuggets needed to make a move. So despite me not loving the Nuggets offseason so far, and despite me certainly never being a fan of Russell Westbrook by any means, I kind of like this move for the most part. I'm going to explain to you guys why. First and foremost, the Nuggets needed to do something, right? They lost KCP. They had a gaping hole in their lineup. And so presumably Christian Brown's probably going to get that starting spot, maybe Peyton Watson, but it's most likely going to be Christian Brown. And so not only do they have to, fill that starting spot with one of the guys from their bench, but that means they now have a hole in their bench rotation. And they lost Reggie Jackson as well. He was, again, exchanged to some team for a couple second-round picks. Reggie Jackson was later bought out and ended up signing with the Philadelphia 76ers, by the way. But that being said, there's a hole on the Denver Nuggets bench, right? And it's especially been a big hole since they lost Bruce Brown a couple years ago, right? You think about that version of the 2023 championship Nuggets. The two main guys that they lost were KCP, who, again, is now with the Orlando Magic, Bruce Brown, who's currently buried on the Toronto Raptors, I believe. But regardless, they have been missing that bench point guard, bench creator, and especially with the absence of Reggie Jackson, I think Russell Westbrook is going to do a good job of filling that role. The big shift that's taken place with Russ, I think, is when he joined the Clippers. He probably had a bit of an ego death when he was on the Lakers, and it really was ugly on all fronts when he was with the Lakers. That really never worked out even from the start. And so once he was sent over to the Clippers, or signed with the Clippers rather, he clearly bought into his role of being an energy guy off the bench, understanding he is no longer a true star in the NBA, but that doesn't mean he can't impact games in a major way. And I think him being in the high energy role, getting his teammates involved, running the offense for the second unit, really just shaking things up off the bench is where Russ is going to thrive. I'm sure Jokic is very comfortable with this move. I'm sure all roads lead through Jokic, but this definitely puts the Russ can't win narrative to the test. I've been a firm believer in that with how he was playing in the first several stops of his career, that if he was going to continue to play how he played and carry himself like a top 5 player, they were never really going to win anything. It was just going to be impossible to win with that guy. But I do think that Denver is still a juggernaut, still very much could be the team to beat in the West. And so this Westbrook addition, he's going to give you energy. He's going to give you a ton of effort, and he's going to give you an impact off of the second unit one way or another. Maybe they even end up closing games with him. I don't exactly know how that would work from a floor spacing perspective. I doubt it. I think that would just be pretty clunky, despite the genius of Jokic, that, having Westbrook out there, who's a non-shooter at this point in time, Gordon, who's usually a non-shooter, and then Jokic being the one handling the ball. Like, it would just be interesting to see how that all shakes out. But regardless, I expect him to be a big second unit piece for the Nuggets. So that is a very notable move. The next move I wanted to talk about was the Bucks adding to their sneaky, really good offseason. I mentioned them as like an honorable mention in the winners section on the last podcast. They also signed Gary Trent to a one-year deal, which, again, that's kind of a guy that I was a little surprised the market was so cold for him that he settled for basically a minimum one-year contract. But again, the Bucks offseason looks like them signing Taurean Prince, signing DeLon Wright, and now signing Gary Trent Jr. Like, for a team that, again, made their big move last offseason in the swing for Damian Lillard. They are really capped out. They don't have a lot of moves to make. They found a way to work around the fringes and definitely improve the roster. And those are three guys that I think are significant upgrades over some of the role players in their roster last year, like Jay Crowder and Malik Beasley, maybe even Pat Connaughton. I think that those three guys that they acquired are better than all of those guys. Pat Bev as well, who, by the way, Pat Bev signed with some team in like an Israeli league. So good riddance to Pat Bev in the NBA, at least for this season. It wouldn't surprise me if he's back in the league again at some point. Not sure what him signing with an Israeli professional team is going to do for his pod listenership. Maybe that's something he wants to consider and has already thought out. But regardless, we're not going to have to deal with Pat Bev on the NBA scene for at least next season, which I think is great news. Next move we have to talk about is the Cavs. Now, they didn't necessarily acquire anyone new within the past couple weeks, but they did make a really big commitment to their front court, re-signing both Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. So Mobley signed for basically the rookie max extension of 5 years, $224 million. And Jarrett Allen, very recently, as of like yesterday, I believe, signed a 3-year, $91 million contract with the team. As a reminder, they also re-signed Donovan Mitchell to a mega contract earlier this year. So the Cavs are pretty committed to, again, they made a coaching change, but beyond that, running it back with the core that was in place. And the big question mark I think people had was like, hey, we saw how Mobley looked against Celtics as like playing in that 5 spot with Jarrett Allen dealing with injury and everything like that. And that seemed to unlock Mobley a little bit more on offense and improve the Cavs' floor spacing for sure. Is Jarrett Allen going to get moved this offseason? He's obviously a really valuable player, and the Cavs are like, screw it. Part of our defensive identity is having both of those guys out there, and they're sticking with it. So it's kind of interesting. It's not to say that ultimately they can't pull the plug on that. I'm sure like Allen's contract at least is pretty tradable. Mobley, not so much, but they were never really going to move that guy anyway. So we'll see how committed they are, but it seems like no one's going anywhere unless they decide to move Darius Garland later in the offseason. But frankly, I think that move would have already happened. So it seems like Cleveland is basically running it back. Also worth noting, Luke Kennard re-signed a 1-year, $11 million contract with the Memphis Grizzlies. Again, he was on the Grizzlies last year as well. But it was just notable because I think Kennard, with how good of a shooter he is, he's like one of the more desirable free agents out there. You knew he wasn't going to be like a minimum guy. So 1 year, $11 million to stay with Memphis is a nice little pickup there. Spencer Dinwiddie is back in Dallas on a 1-year deal as well. Look, the Mavs are still winners this offseason. They definitely improved with the additions of Klay Thompson, Najee Marshall. And I just think in general that the Mavericks were able to work around the fringes a little bit and improve their team. But I honestly think, genuinely, not being a Mavericks hater here by any means, this deal makes the Mavericks worse. I'm sorry. Spencer Dinwiddie is not a positive impact player. And I think with the encouraging signs that you saw from Jaden Hardy last year, I think that he's kind of that perfect, ball handler, spark off the bench type of guy like that you need. You already have him in-house on a cheap contract. He's young, he's ascending, he's a really talented scorer, and you bring in Dinwiddie to have questionable perimeter shooting and like everything has to run through him on the second unit. He's going to probably be really obnoxious in the locker room. They've already had several different, I know they liked him in Dallas. They absolutely hated him in Washington and in a few other stops as well. I personally, I don't like watching Spencer Dinwiddie play. I certainly don't like listening to the guy talk. And I just don't really know why that Mavericks team needs any more backcourt depth. I mean, sure, if there's an injury, maybe it'll be nice to have Dinwiddie, but I still think Hardy is a much more valuable piece off the bench for the Dallas Mavericks. And I honestly think that Spencer Dinwiddie makes him a worse team. So be interesting to see what you guys think about that move. So let me know if you disagree, but that's my 2 cents on Spencer Dinwiddie. And then finally, a really interesting move as well. The Phoenix Suns were able to sign Tyus Jones to a 1-year, $3.3 million deal. So dirt cheap, bottom barrel contract for Tyus Jones, which I was surprised on 2 fronts. First of all, that, again, I guess I'm not that surprised that the Wizards were incompetent, that with Tyus Jones hitting free agency, that they weren't able to move him at the deadline or something like that. There seemed to be some buzz around Tyus Jones and some teams that were interested early at the start of last season. So, not that surprising that the Wizards weren't able to capitalize on that asset that they just lost for nothing. But secondarily, I was pretty surprised that the market for Tyus Jones was so low. Like, obviously for my Celtics, they're covered in that department, but I figured he would command more than a 1 year, $3.3 million deal on the market. Like, I didn't watch a ton of them in Washington because I hated watching the Wizards, but I feel like Tyus Jones is pretty well respected around the league and exactly what you want in typically a backup point guard role. But people love to say that the Suns lost because they didn't have a point guard and it was too much stress on Booker to get his teammates involved, wasn't looking for his own shot enough. Well, I guess we're going to find out if that is actually true and if it really is going to turn the Suns around a little bit. Maybe he even cracks the starting lineup. I doubt it. I still think they're going to roll with at least like a similar starting five to what they had last year with Booker, Beal, Durant, Grayson Allen, and then Nurkic is probably going to be their lineup. But hey, there could be times later in the season where Tyus Jones gets a nod, they move Grayson Allen to the bench, whatever. But it is not the only move that the Suns made this offseason. They also signed Mason Plumlee, they signed Monty Morris, and they signed EJ Liddell as well in the offseason. So even if they start Tyus Jones, they'd still have a decent backup point guard option as well, and Monty Morris. And honestly, again, for another team that was completely handicapped as far as like what they could do salary wise with cap space, I really like the moves that the Suns made. I think they did get better. I think they having like even Mason Plumlee, I know he's kind of goofy to watch, but I think he is a pretty solid backup center at this point in time and can give you a little bit more defensively than Nurkic in certain matchups. I still love Bol when they throw him out there, and other teams are like, what the hell do we do with this guy? So Bol was re-signed. He's still on the roster. So I don't know. I think the Suns, again, just like the Bucks, worked around the fringes a little bit to make their team better. And it, regardless, like whether Tyus Jones starts or comes off the bench, like that is a great move. That is a great move for the Suns team to at least have the option of a point guard to turn to. Some games it might matter, like Book is cooking and they want to play him off the ball a little bit more, somebody to handle the rock and put him in spots to succeed. But just to have that option to pivot to is going to be huge for the Suns. So I really like that move for the Suns. And then finally, we do have another contender in the East, we can say now, that made a significant move, and that was the Knicks re-signing Precious Achiuwa on a 1 year, $6 million contract. Not terribly surprising. Like, I very much expected them to re-sign Precious, but they also just like had to re-sign Precious, right? Like with them losing Hartenstein to free agency, he signed with the Oklahoma City Thunder on a 3-year deal. That's a massive loss for the Knicks, and that is a lot of chips on the table for Mitchell Robinson's health, which he's proven to be very unreliable in that department. So they needed a backup big. Like, they really had nobody besides like Jericho Sims, I guess. I think he's still on the team. So regardless, Precious actually proved to be a decent option in the end of the regular season when everybody was banged up, and even in the playoffs as well. So 1 year, $6 million for Precious is nothing, and the Knicks really couldn't afford to lose that guy. So that must be a sigh of relief for Knicks fans listening to this podcast as well. So that's really about it as far as the free agency news. Again, wasn't really expecting anything else. I think this is probably the final notable free agency update we'll have at this point in time. Now, we will discuss if there's any big trades or anything like that. It is worth noting that Lauri Markkanen is, again, probably the biggest target out there that is, unofficially on the trade block, right? There's definitely a lot of rumors of him not being long to stay in Utah. He does become extension eligible on August 6th, so that's just like literally a week away at this point in time. So it looks pretty likely at this point, according to Bobby Marks of ESPN, that he is going to re-sign in Utah at this point in time. Now, again, that we know how Danny Ainge operates, right? There's a chance that he's signed and then traded. But again, I think we're going to have some sort of update on Lauri Markkanen's future within the next week or so. So definitely stay tuned for that on the next podcast. And that's really about it as far as NBA news and updates. So let's make the hard pivot to talking about Team USA Olympic basketball. So Team USA is currently 2-0 in group play in the actual Olympics after a pretty rocky start during the exhibition games. It is funny to say that because, of course, Team USA men's basketball is still undefeated, but basically all of their exhibition games felt, way closer than they should have been, so to speak, right? And most recently, again, they played Serbia in the first game in which they won 110-84. It was truly a masterclass from Kevin Durant. He shot the ball perfect in the first half and, wasn't too far off from that in the final box score as well. Braun was fantastic as well. And the game wasn't all that exciting despite Team USA facing off against arguably the best player in the world in Jokic. Team USA was in the driver's seat basically the entire time, up double digits for the vast majority of the action. But the headline was Jayson Tatum was benched. He did not play a single minute in that game, as well as Tyrese Halliburton. I don't know, not many people are talking about Halliburton being benched because he's certainly a much smaller name. I don't know if he was hurt or what his deal was, or if he was benched just like Tatum. For the sake of this episode, I am just going to assume he was benched as well. But obviously, people are clowning Celtics fans, clowning Jayson Tatum, calling him Waterboy, whatever. I get it. Some of it was funny, some of it annoyed me, but needless to say, it wasn't the best feeling to watch a guy who was quite literally the second best player on the previous Olympic team that, again, won the gold in 2021. To watch him get benched kind of sucked. So just worth noting, let's just kind of cover the South Sudan game, which was again today on July 31st. They did beat South Sudan 103-86. Again, this one was not super competitive either. Certainly a little bit closer than the Serbia game. Not as competitive as the first go around against South Sudan. That game was insane, in which the U.S. only won by 1 point despite being down the majority of the game against South Sudan in the exhibition matches. But Tatum actually started this game over Joel Embiid. Didn't do a whole lot in the box score. Can't act like Tatum's been lighting it up this Olympics. I do feel like he deserves to be out there. It's a pretty tough game from Steph. I think he finished shooting 1 of 9 from the field, so that was pretty tough. But Bam Adebayo played incredible. Derek White was amazing off of the bench as well. Really, the second unit kind of stole the show for Team USA today. And the headline, yet again, Joel Embiid was benched against South Sudan. Not only did he not go from starting the previous game to now he did not play a single second whatsoever. It seemed like Tatum literally replaced him in the lineup and then also took his minutes. So where does that really leave us, right? Because back-to-back games, Steve Kerr and the coaching staff of Team USA, which is also loaded with guys like Ty Lue and Eric Spoelstra, absolutely loaded roster from top to bottom, whether we're talking coaches or players. Like, it just kind of leaves people like, what is going on here? My take on it, and again, feel free to call me biased. We all see the glowing Celtic sign behind me if you guys are watching on YouTube or whatever. I just don't love the move to bench an MVP caliber player in the Olympics. I think it's a pretty tough sell, especially considering the games have not been close, right? Like, they were up double digits in basically the entirety of their real Olympic games so far, right? Like, you can't carve out 10 minutes for a guy who's going to be, for either guy who's going to be in the MVP conversation next year. You can't carve out 10 minutes for those guys just so it doesn't become a headline, because let's face it, you're setting them up to get ridiculed. Like, they're going to get cooked. And whether these players actually care about getting cooked online or whatever, like, there's definitely a pride thing. Like, they both consider themselves top 5 players in the world. Damn, I didn't play a single second. And if the games are super close and down to the wire and Steve Kerr really believes in his rotation and his matchup, and that's great. But again, when you're up double digits the entire time, isn't now the time to be carving out minutes for these guys? We're not talking about Derek White and Tyrese Halliburton getting benched here. I mean, I guess we could for Halliburton in game 1 or whatever. We're talking about guys that have either MVPs or NBA championships in Joel Embiid and Jayson Tatum. Now, again, as a Celtics fan, definitely made me happy that Tatum wasn't the only guy benched, and now Joel Embiid is the one under the microscope. But you can call me soft or whatever. I don't love it. Again, if the game is down to the wire and you really believe in your matchups, you need to have the guys that you feel the most confident out there and guys that are already in the flow of the game and everything like that, then sure, go for it. Bench someone then. But even then, you're putting yourselves in a situation where you're taking an even bigger risk as a coaching staff, because any loss for Team USA Olympic basketball with how loaded their roster is going to be disastrous. But then when you have the additional storyline of like, hey, they lost to Germany and they benched Jayson Tatum. They lost to France and Joel Embiid didn't play a single second, right? I don't know, maybe if Kerr was just had a conversation with Embiid, maybe he wasn't as healthy. I doubt that was the case with Tatum, but with Embiid, it is believable he wasn't at 100% health, and maybe he just did it to take the heat off of what he did for Jayson Tatum last game, because people were asking him after the first game against Serbia, like, hey, what was the deal with Tatum not playing? And Kerr owned up to it, and he said he felt like an idiot for not getting him out there. He didn't necessarily apologize, but he did say that he felt bad about it and that every game was going to be different, and he expected Tatum to play a lot in the next game. And sure enough, maybe it was overcompensated, but he put Tatum in the lineup. So it'll be interesting to see who's the odd man out for the next game. I get it is tricky to have a 12-man rotation in 40-minute Olympic basketball games, but I didn't love it. You can call me biased as a Tatum defender, but again, I think it's a little ridiculous. More so in the case of Tatum, especially for a guy that, again, has already won a gold medal, was literally the second best player on the 21 team besides Kevin Durant. You know, Embiid I'm less upset about because Embiid is just eye test wise looked pretty brutal out there. Again, Tatum isn't lighting it up, but Embiid, he's falling all over the place. He's still doing his foul baiting stuff that isn't working. And I just think that we've had 2 better Olympic caliber centers in Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo. They've been 2 of the bright spots of the team. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on the Olympic bench warmers anyways. But overall, watching Team USA, like, let's kind of zoom out. It has been very cool to watch. Like, I think as much as the rest of the world has caught up, so to speak, and they definitely have, right? Like, all these guys on all these Olympic teams, they're playing pro basketball. Like, and people got a lot of flack for being disrespectful of South Sudan before the first exhibition game. And sure enough, like the roster that they filled it out there, despite them being a young nation and certainly a young basketball nation, it is crazy the talent that they had up there. Like, and again, they have NBA guys, right? They had JT Thor, they had Wenyan Gabriel, they had this point guard that put up a triple double in the exhibition game and was cooking Team USA again today. We'll be interested to see if he is able to kind of spark up a professional career here in the States. But regardless, like, it's really cool to watch the rest of the world really step up their game, so to speak. And it's certainly the playing field is more level than what it was probably 20 years ago. But that being said, Team USA is still head and shoulders above everybody else, man. Like, they are so talented. The coaching staff is completely loaded. Consensus argument out there is that Canada is probably the biggest competition to Team USA, and they also have a team of entirely NBA players, except they only have one NBA player that would even have a shot at cracking Team USA's roster, and that's obviously Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like, I don't think anybody else even makes the cut to be considered for it. So it is just worth noting, like, despite the fact that the rest of the world is caught up, there is no reason for Team USA to lose once the actual Olympic game starts, right? Like, the exhibition games, I understand there was a scare with South Sudan and Australia, and all the games were relatively close, but the Team USA has no business losing. So, and frankly, I don't think that they will. I really don't watch because I'm like really nervous about them losing. Obviously, I hope for the best, but I'm really watching for the coolness factor, right? For those moments between like Steph and LeBron James after playing against each other in all those finals, right? And like, you know, the moments like KD and Anthony Edwards playing alongside each other. Like, there's so many storylines, but it is just really cool to watch. So I've enjoyed it. But I think overall, when you're looking at Olympic basketball, I think it's more of a showcase for the NBA than anything else, right? Like, there's just never a situation in which, I'm not going to say a non-NBA guy contributes to the game, because that certainly happens all the time with other nations. But still, all the best players in the Olympics are all playing in the NBA. Like, genuinely, who is the best player in the Olympics who has never played a minute in the NBA? I genuinely do not know. Like, I'm not sure. I'm interested to find out with the rest of this Olympics as we watch Olympic basketball the rest of the way. So if you guys have a pick for who's really jumped out to you that isn't playing in the NBA in the Olympics, please enlighten me so I can keep an eye on them in future Olympic matches. So I was actually yapping so hard for a second there, my outro got corrupted, and now it is the next morning on August 1st. So if that is not the ultimate sign, I probably went a little too long on that podcast. I don't really know what is, but that being said, that is going to do it for this episode today. I appreciate you guys giving me a listen as always. I will be back probably in about 2 weeks just because I am going home and don't feel like lugging this podcast equipment with me. But that being said, I will be back with most likely some rankings of the top players in the NBA. People seem to enjoy that series at this time last year. Might try to bring in some guests as well to do a deep dive on some of the most interesting teams of the offseason, so stay tuned for that. But we'll try to be a little bit more consistent with my offseason content moving forward. Be sure to follow at Words with Wallace on everything that includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts, and on social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Be sure to follow the show there so you never miss a new episode. And I will talk to you guys in about 2 weeks. Peace.